Thinking in terms of the stack, stack thinking is very deep ingrained at Orange Capital Partners, and I want to talk about this because it applies to compute as much as it applies to biotech. In fact, the reason we're invested in biotech is because for the first time we believe that stack thinking is applicable to biotech, and that's what hopefully will make the discipline an engineering discipline. This is the way we see the world right now, and I think importantly, before we go into details, I want to just, for new listeners, the purpose of this podcast is to give people a sense of what it feels like to run a hedge fund. And there's obviously many ways you can run a hedge fund. So we want to give people a sense for all the aspects, the emotional stuff, the intellectual stuff, the money-making stuff, the money-losing stuff. But in this particular episode, I want to talk about the approach. I think that's a very, very important part of the game. What is your approach? You can have an approach geared towards finding information that others don't have. You can have an approach that is more geared towards doing it yourself, more on the entrepreneurial side. Whatever it is, I think our approach is the stack approach. I want to talk about this. This is Nothing Wrong podcast. It's October 27, 2022. This is Krim Telco. For the day, the fund is up 50 basis points. The market's up 20 basis points. The market's still open, so there's still subject to change. For the year, as we speak, we are down 45.2%. The market's down 17.8%. We're underperforming by 24.4%. So let's talk about the stack approach. What does it actually mean? And then apply it to biotech, because that's really the unusual part. The stack is a phrase from computer science. It's the compute stack, and the compute stack. Anybody who studies computer science will go through the stack. That's what computer science actually is studying the stack. So you start with the physics, all the way down at the physics layer, where you think about semiconductors, where you think about the actual materials that go into the semiconductors, silicon, germanium, and all that stuff. And you're thinking about the NP stuff, which is sort of how do you enhance silicon to make it a better semiconductor, to make it more suitable for the next layer, which is the transistors, and then the gates, which come after the transistors. And then you keep going up the stack. We have microcontrollers or microprogramming. Then we have the ISA, very important. That's a course we're doing with Onur Mutlu. The instruction set architecture, which is the contract between the software and the hardware. And then we go higher up, we go program and algorithm, and then we end up with the problem. Because if you look at it from top down, computers are just helping us solve a problem with electrons. That's what computers are. So we start with a problem. How can a drive car itself? Can we have electrons drive a car? Well, how can we do that? We can define the problem and then write algorithms, and we can use natural language processing models. We can use computer vision. We can use all kinds of things to solve that problem, which is, like Elon Musk said, in the end, you want to control the gas pedal and the steering wheel. And maybe the brakes. And maybe you can do it even without using brakes, but that's a different conversation. But the point here is the following. How can we use electrons to drive a car? Well, we can do it in many ways. One is to write algorithms that somehow get compiled down onto assembly language or some sort of machine language, and then from there it gets translated into actual actions, into whatever the word is, the things that actually move, the accentuator, I think, or something like that. Doesn't matter. The point here is, how do you translate the problem from high level down to the electrons? And now, using that same stack concept in biology, it's kind of similar in the sense that we have a problem. For example, we have a disease, right? We feel bad. We can't, let's say we have a problem with our lungs. We can't breathe properly. What's the problem? Now, how far down the stack can we actually go to understand the problem? And this is where biology has made some really, really interesting advances in recent years, because now we can go down the stack quite a bit. We can go all the way down to the DNA, actually. We can change the DNA, and we can try to understand how the DNA affects that particular problem. Now, we're not at the point like with computer science where we have full control over the stack, and that's because we didn't develop the stack. It was nature that developed the stack. But we're getting there, and I think that's really what's so interesting about biotech. It's that we keep getting more insight into different layers of the stack. So we have cells and organisms, organisms, and then cells, and then within the cell we have certain proteins and RNA and DNA and the whole story of the dogma in biology, which is DNA, RNA, protein. It's obviously not as clear cut, but we can kind of try to abstract our level in such a way that we have access to these levels of the stack, and most importantly, we can manipulate. That's what CRISPR helps us do. It helps us manipulate the stack at a very low level, maybe not the lowest. It's the DNA level. We could go even lower and try to manipulate the chemistry within the DNA, which is kind of what base editing is doing, and all of that kind of stuff. But I don't want to get too technical here. My point is very simple. My point is that the more insight and control we have over the stack, the more opportunities we have to solve problems, and the more opportunities we have to create new problems. And this is where businesses arise. In the podcast yesterday, I spoke about sort of the good way and the bad way to generate wealth. And I want to stick with the good way, which is you use your creativity, hard work, innovation, and humility to build products that people want. To build products that people want to buy, products and services. And those types of things happen typically when we apply solutions across the stack. This is in a nutshell what stack thinking means. So whenever we have a situation in real life where we can go more granular across the stack, the compute stack being either, like I said, in biology, where we have abilities to influence and get insight into different layers of the stack, or in compute. We've spoken about changing paradigms in compute and all of that stuff, which is incredibly important. But again, I want to stick with biotech here in this particular episode. So the stack thinking, again, how is this important? Let's say you're a hedge fund manager, you go to a conference, and you hear about people being able to, maybe for the first time, manipulate DNA in a way that is interesting. Well, this should immediately ring a bell. Okay, there's something we can do with the stack that we haven't been able to do before. This is what's so interesting, and that's where wealth is being created. That's the way we think about it. Now, it might not be the only way or the right way or whatever. That's irrelevant. Like when you run money for a hedge fund, you don't need to be hung up with absolute things. You don't need to worry about, well, is there a better way to make money? Are there people that know more about me and all of that stuff? It's not so important. Find your place in the stack where you can actually influence something, where you can have, let's say, where you can have some value added, where you see the dots being connected in a way that hopefully will create better products and services. This is really what it's all about. So this is what we mean with stack thinking. And this is what I wanted to get across in this particular episode. So to summarize, stack thinking is compartmentalize a problem, let's say biology, into different layers. Let's call these layers the stack. And then try to apply technology to solve problems, create new problems across the stack. And then find ways to maybe also solve problems inter-stack. So one layer can solve problems on the higher level. Let's say if we go back to the compute example, you can solve problems. That's what Onur Mutlu is so good at, where he's trying to explain to his students that you could maybe solve the gene sequencing problem by having better in-memory compute. Because you're looking at the higher levels of the stack, you're looking up and down. Like he said, a computer architect looks up, looks down, looks back and forth. And I think we should think about that also in biology. You know, we look up and down, so we go from the top. Let's say we have a disease, we have a lung disease or cancer or something. Then we go down, okay, how does this affect the cells? And then we go further down, how does DNA relate to that disease? And then we go back up. We go from the DNA back up to the disease, and we see, can we manipulate that? That's what CRISPR is so good at. We can we can do a lot of try and error runs and epochs, if you want to use machine learning language, and try to see, okay, how will this particular sequence change affect the disease? How will this particular, and so on and so forth. So thinking across the stack is just by having this approach towards the world, the stack approach, I think it's already opening up a lot of avenues. And then, of course, we have the opportunity to innovate within the stack. So we have companies like our portfolio company, Intelia, which is innovating on the CRISPR side. So they are actually manipulating DNA, but they're also innovating on the delivery side, which is another level of the stack. Call that sort of, it's kind of maybe like the gates in the compute stack. So there's a lot of these interesting, once you segment the real world into stack, you start having more opportunity to solve problems across the stack and also interstack. Well, once you understand, again, the Onomutlu example is so beautiful, where you have gene sequencing, which is a problem that needs to be solved with computer. Again, how do we read genes with electrons? That's the problem of gene sequencing. How do we read genes with electrons? Well, we use computers, we use technology, we use IT to do that. And the way we do that is by innovating across the stack. In the case of gene sequencing, we could do maybe in-memory compute, so we can actually save on energy and power and speed by doing a lot of the comparisons that gene sequencing does in memory. So this is just one example, a beautiful example. Highly recommended, by the way, the Onomutlu course at Zurich Polytech. And again, I think the stack thinking, it's our approach. We're not saying it's the only approach. If there are funds out there that do different types of work, it's fine. But I think when you're after the big problems, when you're after the really big impact that technologies can have, which is in the end what we believe is the wealth creating factor, when you're after long-term value creation, then I think thinking along the stack is a very, very useful tool to segment the world and find approaches where app capital can be employed successfully in order to solve problems, create new problems, and basically build the innovation stack that is necessary to create successful businesses. Thank you.